Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Freedom Forum, and I'd like to welcome Yves Potvin from Canada. Welcome, Yves.
Hi, how you doing? Good evening.
No worries. Pleased to have you. Pleased to have you. Um, the title for tonight's discussion, reconciliation, and I understand that there is a North American basic income meeting coming up, the basic income movement, and I know that people from Australia have gone to attend those meetings, and they've gone several times, as in annually they've gone to attend some meetings and presentations, and they've presented the case for social credits, the national dividend. And I just wondered if you'd give me a heads up as to your understanding of what's going on in North America at this coming up weekend or whatever.
Yeah, in Toronto
Okay.
uh, this Saturday. So, yes, well, my idea of a basic income is definitely something that we should do, although it's not set up the way that it should be. Where did the money come from? That's the question that we have to ask.
Yep.
So, our colleagues in Toronto will be involved in discussions in Toronto
Yep.
during that march, and they will be discussing not only a basic income but a dividend, a national dividend.
Yep. Yep.
Which dividend is a thing that it's the sharing of the profit that this country has made over the different years, over the past centuries, and instead we've inherited a debt. So there is a lack or a gap in the availability of money,
Mhm.
uh, which which should be given to every Canadian.
Mhm.
For us, Canadian, Australia would be Australians.
Mhm.
So everybody has to get involved in getting that share that has been denied uh, from us by powerful people.
Okay.
I have a picture here of a homeless person sitting on a bench,
Mhm.
and it says, "We say the poor are disinherited when in fact they are denied their inheritance."
That's right.
So that's the whole story right there. My idea of basic income definitely is a yes, but if you take it from Peter to give to Paul, I'm kind of iffy about. I'm very skeptical about that part.
Yeah, no, I appreciate where you're coming from. And as I understand it, the basic income movement is advocating a tax to pay for the basic income. I personally object to that because, yes, you're right, it is taking from Peter to give to Paul, when in actual fact there is a chronic shortage of purchasing power. You called it money, and it is. It's purchasing power in order for us to liquidate prices of the goods that we actually produce. So, this chronic shortage now, I want to talk about reconciliation because I think it's very, very important. And in this regard, I need to define words and what they mean. Now, when I speak about a capitalist, what I'm referring to in a capitalist is the right for someone to make a profit. Now, a labourer is a capitalist because he wants to make a profit from his labour, and so is a tradesman, so is an industrialist, so is a magnate. Everyone wants to make a profit, so that's capitalism. But exploitive capitalism, monopoly capitalism, or financial capitalism, these are, if you like, centralising power in the hands of a few. And that's not about profit. That's well past profit. That's about power. And so, in centralising capitalism, that is about power, whereas capitalism, in a sense, or if you like, free enterprise, is an inherent, to me, right that everyone should have. Now, the other side of the coin is, though, okay, let's define socialism. You can have a go at this in a sec, Eve. Socialism. To me, socialism or communism is essentially a totalitarian structure that insists that the state, which is run by individuals, mind you, the state has ownership and control of everything, including the means of production. Now, that in itself, I find no difference between monopoly capitalism or finance capitalism and socialism or communism. They are both totalitarian. So those definitions I put on the table. But I want to clarify, as I said, about the individual wanting to be a capitalist. He wants to actually make a profit. That's not exploiting. That's just, to me, a fair and equitable situation. But let's consider socialism, and that is that we live in society and we utilise social, if you like, facilities, ambulances, fire brigades, police, army, roads, infrastructure, bridges, water, sewer, power. All of these things are part of our, if you like, our cultural inheritance. And so we utilise them, and so we should. And so we should. Those facilities should be there and available for all. And it's when you start looking at, if you like, the natural resources of a nation, and I find this interesting because to me water is in the forefront of our minds in Australia. Natural resources, the inherent right to the asset of water should be fairly distributed to all. And that means that the farmer, if he's a farmer and he wants enough water to grow crops, it should be at a fair price in a sufficient volume and reliably provided in order for him to have it. That's part of the social infrastructure that he has a right to. Whereas if you insist that that asset belongs to the state and it can exploit it as it sees fit and it dishes it out as it sees fit, that to me is totalitarianism. So to me, the two sides of the coin, the degrees to which we go, which in actual fact both are over here to totalitarianism and over here is freedom. That's my definition of capitalism and socialism or communism. Your thoughts, Eve?
Yeah, very good. I think you're absolutely right. There's been ratings about different words: communism, socialism, capitalism, and other system. These words, or these systems, I should say, have been vitiated. They've been taken advantage of
That's
for
right.
the benefit of certain people,
Individuals, yeah.
certain individual.
Yeah.
But let's look at just capitalism, for example. I believe that capitalism should belong to everybody. So it is therefore not the capitalist economy in itself that must be blamed. One must not wish for the destruction of capitalism, but for its widespread diffusion. If there is only 5% of the population of a nation that enjoys the status of capitalism,
Hmm.
one must strive to increase this percentage to 100% instead of wishing to bring it to zero.
That's right.
So this is an article uh, by the popes, by the church,
Yeah.
and this is what we comment on. And when the state or the system takes advantage of those things, then we're at a loss. We cannot win. We cannot win.
That's right.
Capitalism might as well be communism, and communism might as well be capitalism because
That's right.
both of them do not do what they're supposed to do.
That's right. The oligarchs, whether it's the capitalist oligarchs or it's the socialist communist oligarchs, own and control everything. And we only have to look at the billionaires that are coming out of totalitarian states and they're confiscating the assets of the states. And yet, in our supposedly free enterprise society, and it's not, I believe it's a capitalist society, the assets of the state are essentially handed over to corporations. Most recently, in the last 20 years, has been water. And we're in dire straits for water because the if you like, industry, corporations are exploiting it like mad, and they should never have been given ownership and control of that natural asset. It belongs to the community. So the reconciliation, okay, we're sort of building a case here about seeing the evil in both camps. And there is inherent evil in both camps. There's no question about it. They have been exploited and they are being taken advantage of. Now, there is, in my view, an opportunity to reconcile the both camps, that we can enjoy a social relationship. We can enjoy the social infrastructure, but at the same time, and have our inheritance from that. At the same time, have our inheritance from it. In other words, what the nation can produce should be capable of being liquidated or bought by the individuals in the nation. That's what, to me, is about the reconciliation, and that is sufficient spending power in the hands of the individuals so they can actually liquidate the costs of production. Because we don't produce, very few industries produce locally. They're always using machinery, they're always using technology, they're always using nowadays advanced control, and of course they're using the assets of, if you like, the cultural inheritance of all that technology in order to make a profit, and all for them for making a profit. But if it can't be liquidated, if it can't be bought by the community, then of course it disenfranchises. So the social responsibility of producing is actually, if you like, circumvented. It's circumvented. It's actually stopped up. I've heard that said. It's stopped up. So it's very important. Douglas recognised this and saw it in it when he correctly observed it and correctly described it and correctly defined it. He said that to resolve this issue, to reconcile both capitalism and communism, you've got to come into the area where they're both directionally are correct. We do have a relationship with community, but we do have a right to take advantage and make our own profit. And that's where the national dividend, consumer price discount, comes into it. And I think that that's a very, very interesting position. Nowhere near totalitarianism, but it balances the both polarizing points of view, social and, if you like, entrepreneurial. It balances the two. Yves, your thoughts?
Oh, yeah, there was. I was reading an article in one of the old Michael Journal, and it's actually in 1917. The Virgin Mary appeared to three kids, three children,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of things came out of that. Although the world hasn't been informed about this, but the nun who kept living until 1996, I think she died in 1996 or 97,
Mm-hmm.
uh, she wrote beautiful articles at the end, and she mentioned about the greed that is going on in the country. So now we have, she mentions that we should go back to uh, listening to God's law. We have the Ten Commandments,
Mm-hmm.
and nobody ever reads those. I read them every day, but most people don't read the Ten Commandments. They
Mm.
don't recognize them, or they know it by basically know it. But the fact is that, for example, the seventh commandment, you shall not. Oh, sorry. The seventh commandment, he said, "Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor," and the eighth is, "You shall not steal."
Mm-hmm.
These two are primary to have a better life,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's through the way we live. But the fact is that these things are not listened to. We've been denied, like I said before, like Mr. Douglas said, Mr. Yves, our movement, we have to love our neighbor.
Yeah.
And if we do not love our neighbor, then we love ourselves. Then we want everything for ourselves. So this brings the chaos into society. So Sister Lucy mentioned that we must go back to the laws of God. Jesus left us some rules
Mm-hmm.
to follow so that the world would live well.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some people definitely don't want to listen. They don't want to listen. They only care about themselves, just like those politicians in the elections. They only care about their own future. They don't care about the people. So that only brings chaos in society.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't notice it in one day, like in 1 second. We suffer from it over a period of time, and it's very hard to pinpoint. That's why they're protected in a way. The politicians are protected. It's hard to pinpoint. The problem is that's what it is right here.
Mm-hmm.
We're not sharing. We're not sharing wealth like we should be.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody is taking care of themselves. So we do not love our neighbor like we should.
Mm.
And we can
Okay,
see that now.
I'm just going to challenge you a bit on that, Eve, because to me, you mentioned before about the robbing from Peter to pay Paul. You mentioned that, right? And I think it's very important that the system of socialism taxes Peter to pay Paul. They tax them to the point where Peter has nothing. But they lie with their taxing because they only tax the normal people, the middle class, if you like. The elite, they don't pay tax. The elite exploit and all that. But the thing is that the elite are having access really through corruption, not only politicians, bureaucrats, but industrial leaders, church, the whole lot. The elites have access to our assets and they harness our cultural inheritance. They claim it as their right and they disenfranchise it. They actually stop us from receiving our cultural inheritance. The day the lever was first used to shift a rock was the beginning of the wheel. It was beginning of the fulcrum, the wheel, the gas turbine, the rocket engine, the dynamo, all the things that that developed from that. And of course, this cultural inheritance, we can produce more than enough, absolutely more than enough. I mean, why is it that China is the only country that's actually doing any work? Why is it that they're the one who's manufacturing almost everything? And it's ridiculous that in Australia we've shut our industries down and it's gone overseas. Now, that to me says that we have answered the productive question. We are more than capable of producing all we need. It's a political question. It's really a political question, and that is, well, if its production is answered, why is the debt so escalating? Why is the taxation so oppressive that people can't afford homes? They come out of school in debt. They go into a generational debt for their homes now. Not just one generation, but more than one generation to pay your home off. These are political questions. They're not physical questions. And so we've got to come back to it and say, well, okay, we can see that the monopoly capitalist exploits. And at the top of that, of course, is the financial system. They exploit the situation for their benefit. And then those that supposedly advocate a solution, calling it socialism or calling it communism, it means let's confiscate everyone's assets and we'll control the lot. Again, a totalitarian state. They will control the assets. That's no different than the monopoly capitalist. They will control the assets. It's both just changing seats, but they're the same elites. Now what we've got to do is reconcile the both. And that is that we are social beings. We have to find a social solution. And I believe Douglas has reconciled it. He's reconciled it in identifying the flaw in the financial system, identifying it, he called it in the price system, that we're actually creating costs faster than we're actually creating spending power. And that's the A plus B theorem. And the solution was the national dividend. It reconciles the inadequacy. It provides a sufficiency. And it places, if you like, voting power, financial voting power, or economic democracy into the hands of the individual. It really is a fascinating revelation. And if ever a revelation of this nature, its time has come, it is right now. We've got to see this. We've got to actually look at the real world, not the theoretical or abstract world, the world of bankers and forecasters and charts and things, but the real world. The real world is it's a world of absolute abundance. It's a world of abundance. Every nation is, if for example in Australia we're stopping up our water or we're sending it out to the sea, but the farmer can't get it to produce the milk. He can't afford to use the water to produce his fruit. And that's ridiculous. What the dickens is going on when our industries are going broke and we're buying produce from overseas? We're compromising our whole security. It's a form of madness, this policy that the politicians and bureaucrats, the industrialists, are pursuing. It's a form of totalitarianism and it's very malevolent. It's deliberately designed to bring us as a nation to our knees. And we've got to come to grips with this. This is a very, very important time. Eve.
Yeah. Modern slaves are not in chain; they're in debt.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
I was just going to go back to C.H. Douglas in 1923 when he went to have this big meeting with the bankers and told them that I have a solution. Here's what we can do to help the world
Hmm.
is by issuing a dividend. And the bankers refuted that right on the spot.
Hmm.
They were only thinking of one thing: power, and power to create money, and the power to control the world.
That's right.
And we only have to look at that. The bankers know that there is a solution.
Yeah.
Why do they refuse to make the people a happier place? Instead, they want to make it a slavery place,
Hmm.
and they want to create pollution.
Hmm.
They want to create. They are completely making the environment. We're not going to be able to live. The people are completely brainwashed in climate change and global warming and all that.
Hmm.
So, I mean, what do we have to do to make them understand? And
Hmm.
I can only see one way of doing it.
Hmm.
John F. Kennedy tried to balk the system. He was a good politician. He tried
Hmm.
to help the country. I believe Trump has certain things that he wants to help his own people. But for that, you have to educate the population.
Yeah.
And to educate the population, there's 350 million people in the States. There is 35 million in Canada,
Hmm.
and just a couple of people to educate the population and go talk to them and see them and make them understand that there is a better world out there.
Yeah.
It's going to be very tough to do.
Aberhart did it, didn't he? On the western, is it Alberta? Aberhart did it in the, was it 1930s?
Yeah, 19 after Douglas had taught
Yeah.
him
Yeah.
a few things. He meant well. We have an article about Eberhard in one of our
Hmm.
magazine here,
Yeah.
and he tried his best, but there was no way that the party at that time, their intention after that, they said we'll never go to Ottawa to make them create the money
Yeah.
because the bankers didn't want to.
No.
Only then they're the only one that can create and control the money of this world.
Was it the Prime Minister of Canada? Was that Mackenzie King? Is that his name at the time? He promised to allow Alberta its sovereignty and to go on with its policy, and then as soon as he was elected, he lied to the electorate and he turned against Alberta and refused to let them be sovereign and
Yeah,
independent and have their own financial system. And I think that's very important because it was one of corruption and deceit. And to me, it's very necessary to identify that through the political process, this is not going to be easy. We look at what's going on with Brexit at the moment, and the fact is that they're doing everything but an effective separation from the European Union. The politicians are manipulating the situation. They're entirely disloyal to the people, and they're certainly going to circumvent the will of the people as best they can. So in Britain, we're seeing the same thing has happened in Canada. And Australia is no different. Exactly the same thing. We've had it all the way from was it Robert Menzies putting the shilling back in the pound. He was going to stabilise our currency, and of course he never did. He described himself. He was a conservative. He described himself as a practical socialist, and I think that's very important. That the politicians have no intention, and the fact is that the political will, the education has to come from the people. It has to come from the individuals. That the point I'm getting at in this discussion is that the Douglas social credit proposal reconciles capitalism and the exploitation of, if you like, the natural resources of the nation and the cultural inheritance that belongs to everyone. It reconciles that, but it also recognizes that we are living in community and we are social beings. Now, I think that was demonstrated quite clearly when the workers in the vineyard, this is scriptural, when the workers in the vineyard were paid the denarius, and some started it early and some started late, but they were all paid the denarius. In other words, everyone was deserving of a day's wage for a day's work, even if they only did a part day's work, they were still deserving of their day's wage. And the other is that when there was a need in community, the 5,000 were fed. What resources did you have? These are the resources that they had, a few fish and loaves of bread. But from that, Jesus caused the increase and the whole community was fed. Now, the third illustration I give you, scripturally, is that we talk about the lilies in the field, the flowers in the field. Look at them. They neither sow nor toil, and yet Solomon in all his glory was not dressed as the least one of these. I think that's fascinating, that Jesus knows we have needs. Seek ye first the kingdom, and all these things will be added unto you. Seek ye first. In other words, look to a godly answer in every circumstance. And to me, envy and jealousy is not a godly answer. What is reconciliation. It brings peace to both. Peace to the individual who wants to, if you like, realise a profit, the individual who has a right to a profit, not exploitive, and not, if you like, seeking power, but just a profit. I call that free enterprise. But also the other side of the equation, and that is in the social circumstance, that young mums, children, old people, they need to be supported by community. All of them need to. And so it is our social responsibility. We are social people, and we've got to reconcile our social responsibility but our inherent right to realise a profit. And this is, as I say before, this is Douglas social credit. This is what it does do. Eve.
Yeah, we were born for one main reason, is to build a better world, to build a paradise on earth. Basically, that's what we were built for. We may not achieve it, but we have to strive to try to get that goal, to build paradise. So when Jesus made this miracle of the loaves and the fish, I recognize the miracle, but I think maybe he wanted to show us in the future that the miracle is happening today. People need to be fed. They need to be covered with clothes. They need their roof over their head. It's here. The miracle, we do it. The technology is doing everything at such a fast pace.
That's right.
We don't have we can hardly catch up, and people are all wrapped up in themselves. That's the problem.
Well, it's
so
not
we
just
have to.
Yeah. I don't see it as being wrapped up in themselves, but I see them as being, if you like, mesmerised by this abstraction called money. And what they've got to do is take a step back from it. They still have to pay the bills. I understand that. I recognise that. I've worked in the industries my whole life, so I know that you've got bills to pay and commitments. And even now, any projects that I want to go after, I think are worth going after. I've got to make extra effort and saving in order to achieve it and realise it. But the thing is that this commodity, which is not a commodity, it's actually an abstraction. An abstraction. It's a thought. If I hold up a piece of paper and I say this is $1,000 bill, and that thought is acceptable to you and you'll accept it as $1,000 bill, it's the abstraction of what it represents. Now, in your bank account on the computer, you go to your bank account on the computer, it's just in front of you, there's the number, and someone puts an extra zero on the end of it, or an extra 2 zeros. That's an abstraction. Oh, I've got all this money to spend. But the fact is you're pursuing it, you're going after all these ends, you're doing whatever you can to pursue an abstraction. And that's how we're brainwashed. That's how this abstraction becomes a real thing to us, when in actual fact it's not. It's just smoke and mirrors. And it needs to come back to, like weights and measures, it needs to come back to a realistic value. This is what it is. This is a value. And that to me is the very thing that Douglas proposed in the National Credit Authority. In that institution, it was similar to weights and measures. That what we're producing as a community, as a city, as a state, as a nation, as a province, what we're producing, we need to be able to purchase. How much money is out there? How much has gone out in wages and dividends? There's a shortfall. Well, based on that shortfall, it's an issued dividend to everyone equally, young and old equally. It's issued, and then it reconciles that the community can buy what it produces. And to me, you work this whole thing through, and you realise, of course, it has been reconciled. The opposites, if you like, our social responsibility and our right as an individual to realise a profit, they can be reconciled. We do have a social duty. Don't think we don't. We do. But at the same time, we have a right, an inherent right, to realise a profit. And that's, to me, is the reconciliation that we need to look for. We're at the 30-minute mark, Eve. I'm going to call for closing comments. We've gone really well on this. I'm going to leave the heading up for next week. So if you've got further thoughts, we can continue on. What are your closing thoughts, please, Eve?
My closing thought is always seems to be the same, but I think it's valuable. Uh, it's to form an army of social creditors,
Mm-hmm,
people that will want justice and peace, of course, and they want to build a better world.
mm-hmm,
And uh, we have to reconcile that. We have to educate the people
mm-hmm,
so that maybe they'll think a little bit better
mm-hmm,
in their future. Because right now they're blaming all the problems that we've mentioned.
mm-hmm,
Yes, we have that problem. Yeah, but now we have to install a solution or educate a solution to the people.
mm-hmm.
I think that's the best message I can bring out. I think.
No, beautifully put. I think that's very, very important. That the part of it is education. Part of it is the renewing of your mind. It's sort of like taking the cotton wool from your eyes and looking out and realizing. You look at the backdrop of behind us in this picture, and it's the beautiful blue sky and it's a lovely autumn setting. And the fact is, the soil, the earth. This is where we come from. At least our body does, and we are integral to the world that we live in. And our, if you like, our sustenance, our physical sustenance, is provided by the world. There's a sufficiency. There's more than enough. We've answered the production question. The issue is the reconciliation of our social needs, our social responsibilities, and our personal inherent right, if you like, to actually to receive the abundance that is there. We call it the national dividend. It's our cultural inheritance. It's being able to consume what we produce. Very, very important. Douglas got it right. In my view, he got it right. Thank you so much for tonight, Eve. I've really enjoyed it. I think it's a good subject, and I would fully expect to explore this subject with other groups over this coming week or even weeks, because I think it's so important.
Yes,
No worries. Thanks
it's
so much.
very. Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Arnis. Have a good week.
No worries. You too. Cheers then. Bye bye.